The Allen Lund Company continues to support the owner-operators of OOIDA. Thank you for what you do, and stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
A lot of things can mess up your truck while you're on the road, but one of the biggest is when your truck hits a large animal. Even a tractor-trailer can experience significant damage from an animal strike. State officials are well aware of the problem, and for years, officials have looked for ways to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions in states across the country. Some think they found a solution, including Oregon. That's where they're building a wildlife crossing across Interstate 5. I recently discussed the project and how it's being put together with Dan Roberts of the Oregon Department of Transportation. We'll have an encore of that conversation today. But first, the news with Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Mark. Driver fatigue and a lack of safe truck parking are a few of the things being blamed for a bus crash that happened in 2023 along I-70 in Illinois. 3 passengers were killed and a dozen others were injured when the Greyhound bus they were on crashed into 3 parked semi-trucks that were on the exit ramp. This week, results from the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation of the crash were released. Brian Curtis is the Deputy Managing Director for Investigations at the NTSB. While reading the findings, he talked about how unsafe it is for tractor-trailers to be parked on exit ramps.
Combination vehicles routinely park on the shoulder of the exit ramp to the Silver Lake rest area due to recurring lack of available truck parking, which increases the risk of them being struck by an errant highway vehicle.
The investigation found a lack of truck parking was what led to those 3 trucks being parked on the shoulder.
The combination vehicles were unsafely parked in the highway clear zone of the exit ramp to the Silver Lake rest area, decreasing the motor coach driver's ability to stop or return his vehicle to the roadway after it departed the travel lane. The limited truck parking capacity and subsequent unsafe parking observed at the Silver Lake rest area were consistent with a lack of access to long-term parking spaces for combination vehicles on the national highway system, as reported by surveys resulting from Jason's Law.
While the lack of truck parking was a factor in the crash, the NTSB found that driver fatigue, Greyhound's lack of discipline for its drivers, and a lack of seatbelt use by passengers also were safety issues at play. International Road Check has come and gone, and once again, market experts noticed a difference. Brent Hutto with Truck Stop says this year's CVSA event happened a different week than last year, which disrupted the data comparisons.
So the data looks a little funny, but it increased quite dramatically. So that's good for truckers. But the good thing is, and as I said when we were talking about the fray, the load posting volumes increased 20%, right at 20%. That's a huge jump in a 24-hour period, which is great. And the good thing is that the freight is still about almost 30% above the 5-year average. And I just say that. I'm going to keep saying that over and over and over as long as we're on the phone together, we're on the radio together, is that's good for owner operators. The segment that you love, that's near and dear to y'all's heart, near and dear to our heart. And so it's super important that those things continue to increase so rates can be more beneficial to them. And speaking of rates only went up about a penny, but there were giant jumps in the van marketplace and the refrigerated marketplace. Van went up 12 cents and refrigerated went up 28 cents, which that's about the biggest increase I've ever seen in the market in one segment.
Stay tuned to later in our show for the full market update. Time is ticking to let the federal government know what you think about an interim final rule that exempts Americans from filing a beneficial ownership information report. Back in March, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network modified the Corporate Transparency Act, which would take all U.S. companies and individuals off the hook to file a beneficial ownership information, or BOI, report. Right now, the vast majority of comments are in support of the modified requirements. Several commenters are asking FinCEN to purge the existing database of beneficial ownership information reports already filed. Public comments are being accepted through May 27th. To find a link to submit comments, you can visit our website at landline.media. Numbers are in from a work zone safety study, and it found that 60% of highway construction firms reported having at least one car crash in their work zone during the past year. The Associated General Contractors of America and Heavy Construction Systems Specialist said data from the survey highlights the need for stronger work zone safety laws and better enforcement. 13% of contractors in the survey reported that construction workers were killed in work zone crashes, while 24% of survey respondents reported drivers or passengers were killed. The majority of those who took the survey said they'd like to see stricter laws against cell phone usage and distracted driving in work zones. The Oregon Department of Transportation is making it easier for motor carriers with oversized loads to get their permits. This week, the department launched Oregon Routing Information Online. This is a web-based self-service permitting system that allows motor carriers to request over-dimension permits 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. This is part of the Oregon DOT's Strategic Action Plan for a more innovative and technologically advanced transportation system. Oregon now joins 44 other states that have implemented similar systems. Police in West Virginia are looking for a truck driver who dropped a trailer in a cemetery and caused damage to grass and headstones. WCHS reports that investigators found tracks in the grass, overturned headstones, and wall damage that marked the path of a tractor trailer that drove down a dead-end road. The article states that GPS issues are thought to have played a role in the driver getting lost. And finally, a class ring from 1938 was returned to the original owner's granddaughter. UPI reports that a woman found the ring in a parking lot of a Starbucks in Wilmington, North Carolina. After using a magnifying glass and some online research, she was able to identify that the ring was from a Virginia Tech graduate who died several years ago. She found an obituary for the original owner's son, who was actually wearing the ring in the photo used for his obituary. She was then able to get in touch with his daughter, who said that receiving the ring was like getting a piece of her father back. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. It's well known among truckers that we have a shortage of safe, secure parking. And for the past few years, a group of congressmen have worked to help solve that. Now that effort is back before Congress again. The Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, or H.R. 1659, would dedicate $755 million to increasing the number of actual truck parking spaces. You can call your congressman today to show your support for the bill at 202-224-3121, or you can write a letter to them at fightingfortruckers.com. Again, the bill is H.R. 1659, the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. The phone number is 202-224-3121, or you can write a letter using the website fightingfortruckers.com. And that's not the only trucking bill out there. Just about everyone who drives a truck for a living has experienced it. You arrive at a loading dock, you need to use the bathroom, and they tell you no drivers allowed. Now Congress is aiming to do something to give you the access you should have always had. H.R. 2514, the Trucker Bathroom Access Act, has been introduced into Congress, and it's extremely important that you call your member of the U.S. House and ask them to support the bill. Again, you can do that through that same phone number and website, 202-224-3121, or through the website fightingfortruckers.com. And meanwhile, if someone tries to coerce you into violating the regulations, call 1-888-DOT-SAFT or file a complaint online to the National Consumer Complaint Database. Next, I'll discuss a wildlife crossing over I-5 in Oregon with Dan Roberts of the state's DOT. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
A lot of things can mess up your truck while you're on the road, but one of the biggest is when your truck hits a large animal. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Rettig. Welcome back to the program. For years, federal and state officials have looked for ways to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, and some think they've found a solution, including Oregon. That's where they're building a large wildlife crossing across Interstate 5. I spoke recently with Dan Roberts, the project manager for the wildlife crossing with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and he's enthusiastic about what the crossing can do. Oregon is putting its first wildlife crossing over Interstate 5. I'm familiar with these. I've talked with people about them before. I've seen articles, but I think a lot of people are not familiar with what we're talking about. Can you kind of explain what we mean by the term wildlife crossing?
Sure, no problem. First off, thank you very much for having me on today to talk about the project. I really appreciate that opportunity. And this is, it's a new venture for the Oregon Department of Transportation. So it's very common across the country that we have a lot of wildlife trying to cross the highway systems that we've put in place. So we're actually just coming around now to try to address that. Because to be honest, in the 1950s, when Interstate 5 was built, wildlife mobility around the highway was not a primary focus of what we did in those days. So over the years, traffic volumes have increased, and we've seen more and more wildlife vehicle collisions. So with that is in 21, the Federal Highway Administration was actually awarded $350 million to target wildlife crossings across the country. And with that, different agencies were able to submit an application and show that they could really serve some benefit to the public from a traffic safety standpoint, as well as a wildlife preservation standpoint, that we could really focus on projects that could help alleviate this problem.
Okay. Now, I know that these kind of come in two flavors here. There are some that I've seen and talked about that are basically a tunnel under the highway. There's also ones that are over the highway. Which one is this going to be, and what helps you determine which one to use?
That's a great question. There are a number of places around the country that have done the undercrossings, and those really lend themselves well if you have the terrain in the area that an additional bridge on the roadway system creates a real nice natural undercrossing. And that was something that we explored in this. Is we had a local group, the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition. It's a 17-member organization that really put a lot of effort into helping build the database of information about the animal movements in the area and looking at the crash history and how we could best serve this. So they brought us 8 different locations to evaluate based on their wildlife data. And with that, our goal then was to take their information and look at what would be the most constructible locations, because they didn't approach that really from the construction side of the question. They were just focused on the wildlife benefit. So at that point, we took their locations, looked at that, and tried to evaluate what would be the most cost-effective locations, and if we had issues with the terrain. You know, this is in the Siskiyou Pass on I-5. So with that, as you can imagine, we've got a number of seismic events that are always occurring at different scales in the area. And the terrain going through the mountain pass is in this location. We've got The northbound, southbound lanes are separated by about 140 feet horizontally. And then on top of that is we have a 40-foot grade separation. So we have a very distinct terrain that we've gone through to get the highway there. And back in the day is different locations is we did put in a few bridges, and we did do a number of cuts into the existing terrain. So the location that we ended up choosing was a natural cut where we have a large bench on both sides of the highway. So that gives us kind of the most natural terrain to try to put some tunnels over the travel lanes of I-5, and then the structure will actually connect over the top of them. We looked at places to try to put a tunnel, and the distances were just pretty substantial. A lot of places is if we had the ability to daylight on both sides of the highway, is they could have been 600 feet long. And that would have to be an extremely large tunnel, which translates into extremely expensive tunnel. And with that is the undercrossings like that, when they're a tunnel, just aren't real conducive to the animals feeling comfortable of going into a long, dark tunnel to get to the other side. If you have a situation where you have more of an open bridge that is very near the surface, and the animals can see daylight easy on both sides, that's one thing. But we just didn't have the opportunity in any of the locations that we were evaluating that was really going to be feasible. So we dropped back and said, well, this looks like it's going to have to be an overcrossing.
You mentioned, of course, that the tunnel would have to be very large were you to use that choice, but this thing is not small. I've looked at the artist renderings, and it's pretty substantial. Can you kind of describe for people who can't see that what this looks like and how big it is?
Sure. And that is something unique to our project, is the scale of the structure itself is very substantial. And there are other projects across the country where you have more of a 2-lane road in a rural situation. And with that, you can kind of build an arch over the road and just, connect things relatively easily with that. In our case, the terrain there trying to get across it's going to be about an 800-foot span to get the wildlife from one side to the other. And there's a lot that goes into that. And a lot of that feedback was provided by the coalition group and all the biodiversity information that they provided to us is they could really help us identify a number of species that would be enticed to use this crossing. And the width of the crossing is going to be about 200 feet. So it is a massive structure. But what we're recreating here is really the most natural environment that we can for the wildlife to get to one side to the other. So just like the tunnels are less enticing to the wildlife, is if we can have the perfect world would be this nice big wide crossing where the wildlife had a perfect line of sight to get from one side to the other, and they could feel very comfortable. Any natural predators in the area they could see and they could adapt to. And the width of the structure, the 200 feet wide, is a big part of that, in that if you made a very narrow crossing, that can be as restrictive as the tunnel under the road, because if they're kind of boxed in and feel that they don't have an escape route or any substantial cover, is they might not be so willing to use the crossing. So the dimensions of this were really driven based on the wildlife needs. And
it's interesting you mentioned their cover. Of course, I think some people get an image here of just a concrete bridge over a highway. But in looking at the artist's renderings, this is, I don't want to use the word landscape because that brings up a different image, but it basically looks like a continuation of the existing forest over the highway.
Exactly. And we talk about landscape as far as what plants that we're going to be including on the surface of the structure and how it ties into the environment in the area is part of that. But habitat is really the secondary part of all the vegetation that we're planning to put on the structure. So we're very cognizant of that. And yes, from just a functional standpoint, just a simple set of box beams across the roads would serve the purpose of making a connection, but we might not have a whole lot of wildlife willing to use that. So what we're doing is taking the natural environment, which is a part of the Siskiyou National Monument, which makes this location even more special, is that this area has over 300 species of wildlife that are present within the monument itself. And we unfortunately bisected that monument back in the 1950s when we built I-5. So we've had an enormous amount of wildlife on both sides of the highway that haven't been able to have easy access to the other side for quite some time. So with that, we're trying to recreate that natural environment from the monument on both sides, vegetation, cover, rocks, boulders, down trees. Our goal is to have it that we recreate that habitat so that the wildlife could actually cross the structure, and under ideal circumstances, they would never know I-5 is below them.
There have been other wildlife crossings built in other areas. As I mentioned before, I've talked with folks that have done them in other places, other states. And I'm sure that you looked at some of those when you were considering this project. How successful have those been in terms of keeping wildlife safe and off the highways?
Yes. I've been working with other DOTs across the country and looked at a number of their projects to see what was successful and find out why they made some of the decisions they did and how they approached it. There's some places like Interstate 25 in Colorado, just south of Denver. They have had a number of projects, and the terrain that they're working with is they really approached it from the standpoint of a series of bridge structures with undercrossings for the most part. And that just was really conducive to their area and the most efficient way they could accommodate those crossings. So they're one of the examples. And I was kind of amazed myself at the start of this, because that was one of the questions that would come up is, hey, we're going to put a lot of effort and money into building this crossing. And are you sure that animals are going to use it? And so that was a very legitimate question. And the really neat thing about this is looking at the history of the other crossing and multiple crossings across the country, is that it's very common that you see a 85 to 90% reduction in the wildlife vehicle collisions.
That was Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We'll be back in a moment with more of my interview with Dan. Meanwhile, you can learn more about the project at the Oregon DOT's website, oregon.gov/ODOT. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We discussed the concept of a wildlife crossing, as well as why the state is considering building this one and others. We also discussed why the specific location was chosen for the crossing, as well as what the crossing will look like, how big it will be, and how successful such crossings have been at protecting wildlife. We now continue that conversation in progress.
With the fencing coordinated with our crossing, is we see a very, very significant reduction in the crashes. And the other part of that was kind of amazing is how quickly the wildlife adapt to the ability to have a crossing. I came into this and thought, well, we do all this effort and this is great, but how long before we see results? The amazing thing is that with a number of documented studies is we actually see wildlife responding within a year. They adapt to it very quickly, and you see that the mothers are bringing the young with them, and with that is the knowledge within the wildlife world is they utilize it very quickly, and it's amazing to see how quickly they do that.
We've talked a lot about the safety of the animals, but there is a safety aspect for the drivers on the road as well, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. It's a significant part of the equation in how we go about finding one of these locations and assessing the benefit of what's going to come from this. So with that this is a mountain pass area, and sometimes we have really inclement weather on the mountain pass that makes things difficult. So if we have wildlife that are trying to transition across the roadway and the drivers trying to avoid those collisions, is that can create a real safety issue for the people. And that, of course, is a huge priority for us, is to try to keep all the motorists safe on the highway, minimize any of these potential crashes that could happen. And so just minimizing those crashes is a big reduction. That benefits from a safety standpoint, and the property damage that goes along with that. So anytime that we have a crash up there with wildlife that creates a response from our crews or from law enforcement, it just expands the risk element and the potential for other secondary crashes and injuries to take place with that. So yeah, it's anytime we can reduce those elements of potential crash, it's a great benefit to the traveling public. And 68% of our traffic on I-5 in this area of the country is our motor carrier folks and the freight folks that are keeping our goods moving up and down I-5. So as long as we can keep them moving freely, safely, it's a real benefit to everybody.
You mentioned some of the different types of wildlife earlier that are in that area that might use the crossing, but I'm wondering if you can kind of go over it in a little bit more detail, because it does sound like there's a lot of different species that could be using this. Kind of list off for us, if you will, what kind of wildlife we're talking about.
Sure. We have a lot of these wildlife crossings tend to be focused on the larger mammals. So your deer, your elk, cougar, black bear in the area. And we have a crash history with all of these larger species. But we also have smaller. We have a number of bobcat in the area, and the Pacific fisher, which is fairly rare. And a number of our smaller species are actually on either the endangered species list or a watch level of concern that they're being tracked and monitored. So we have those larger ones. Something that was new to me when I first got into this project and working with some of our habitat folks is that actually actually focusing on pollinators in the area. So with that is, as you can imagine, you look at the distance to go across where our highway is, that if we can provide habitat and enticement for, we've got some bumblebee species that are very rare and can be helpful, that if we provide habitat for them, they will have a way to safely cross from one side of the monument to the other part of this too. So that gives you a little bit of a range of the species we're dealing with. Interesting side story. One of the locations that I've been studying back in Colorado is this particular case is they built an undercrossing, which was just most conducive to their situation. And when they, I had a chance to visit their site after it was done. And one of the things that they had included was a large windrow of brush all the way across the crossing. And in the middle of it is they had actually put, they called it their frog cam. And it was a camera there to monitor the smaller species that would utilize that to go from one side to the other and feel very comfortable with that cover from, predators possibly being there. And they had documented 17 of the larger species they expected to use the crossing. And a year later, they found that all 17 of those species had shown up. What they didn't really understand or have a good grasp of was what the smaller species were. Yeah, they expected to have some frogs, some salamanders. They had water in this particular location. But within the first year, they found they had 17 additional species that they really didn't have on the radar screen that had utilized the crossing. So that doubled the number of species who had found some benefit to all their efforts there.
Something that kind of goes along with what you're talking about there, that people think of the large mammals, they don't think of those little animals. But I'm wondering if you could explain just a little bit in terms of why those smaller species are important. What is the role that they fulfill in that ecosystem? What are they doing?
Oh, boy, that's a broad range. And yes, when you look at the entire ecosystem, especially being a part of the monument in a protected area, is a lot of effort over the years has been put into that and really put an environment together that all these species can really thrive. So with that, I'm not a biologist by trade, so but I can share some of what I've learned is the chipmunks, the squirrels, the skunks. As surprising as it might be, they have a very distinct role to play in the overall ecosystem, and they found that it's very beneficial that we really help all those different species thrive. That makes the entire culture ecosystem thrive. And that's one of the unique things about being in the Siskiyou National Monument is just the depth of the biodiversity that we have in that area is just, it's amazing. And all of it is interrelated. So if we were trying to create a situation where we were just getting the larger mammals crossing and didn't really address that for the smaller, you could see some of that, the prey and predator relationships in there, that we might be, sustaining one element of the biodiversity and not really helping with the other, and then we could wind up with an imbalance there. So
let's talk a little bit about finances. This is not going to be cheap, obviously, and I think you did refer earlier to some of the aspects of this, but how is the state funding this project? Where is the money going to come from?
Sure. Two elements of our funding here is our state legislature was supportive and understood the value of these wildlife crossings. And Oregon is still behind the curve in regards to the number of crossings that we have. We have a group that worked in Central Oregon on doing several undercrossings, and that was more of the bridge structure. And so they saw the value in that because they saw 85 to 90% reduction in the crashes along their stretch of highway. So that demonstrated pretty much to our state legislators that there is value in doing this. And so the state allocated $7 million a couple of years ago that was specifically to fund the front end, the research and the development and the design efforts to put together a package for these crossings. And part of that was we worked with groups like the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition. I mentioned they had been studying several years of building the data. So we were able to utilize the benefits from their work to partner with us. And then we looked at those locations and said, okay, we can expend some design efforts here to to actually work on the preliminary elements of a project. So that's what we did. We were awarded those funds to do the PE phase. It's the professional engineering phase, really the design up front, to assess this location. And actually we're able to drill some geotech holes so that we got the data that if we choose to build a structure in this location, we know what the foundation is going to be like and we'll be successful. So we moved along in that design effort to build a large portion of this upfront engineering effort. And once we got that far, we knew the location, the size, and the scale of what this was going to be. Is Federal Highways Administration has a wildlife crossing pilot program. And with that, the federal government had set aside $350 million for federal highways to allocate to wildlife crossings all across the country. And with that is the states and agencies were invited to submit an application. And there's a whole list of criteria that they wanted to see that would help them see that this would be a beneficial project to serve both the traveling public from a safety standpoint, as well as how beneficial it would be to the wildlife environment and help that ecosystem.
That was Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We'll be back in a moment with more of my conversation with Dan. Meanwhile, you can learn more about the project at the Oregon DOT's website, oregon.gov/ODOT. Again, that website is oregon.gov/ODOT. We'll have a link to that website at our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page. That will bring you to where we have all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers that we mention here on the show. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Protect your diesel engine with Howe's Diesel Defender. Restore vital lubricity, eliminate injector deposits, and boost fuel economy by 5% or more. Power, performance, protection, all in one. Howe's Diesel Defender, available now.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. We now continue that conversation in progress.
We were able to demonstrate clearly that we had a traffic safety improvement that could be had with a crossing in this location. And being in the Siskiyou National Monument is that made our wildlife element of the project even more special, and such a broad diversity of the animals there really helped pull this together. So our application was approved by Federal Highways. So the funding for the construction part of this is coming from Federal Highways, and being that it's in this dedicated pool of money for crossing pilot program, is that we will all the construction, the $33 million that we were awarded, comes from that Federal Highways program, and it's dedicated funding that is specifically just for a wildlife crossing project.
Okay. Do you anticipate that the state is going to create other wildlife crossings, more of these? Do you think they're going to be overpasses, underpasses, and kind of, if you are, where might those end up?
Well, yes, it's our goal to make this successful, number one, and help demonstrate the benefit of these projects. And we have a very substantial number of crossings that the Oregon Department of Wildlife has data on to isolate those locations that would be beneficial. So I could probably get you a list of 300 to 400 locations across the state of Oregon that have been studied and shown that there's a benefit to having a wildlife crossing there. So, and they range from very large to very small. So that's part of the program, is we go through and evaluate that and see where we can get the most benefit that from a project. And that it's unique in this that no two locations are similar. So the values of those is part of what's the challenge to this crossing. Just like with ours is we've got a national monument on both sides, have very substantial wildlife. And then on top of that is what's the environment to accomplish that crossing? And you can see this one has a lot of elements of challenge with that, but there's also a huge benefit to reestablishing this connection. So there will be a number of projects. We are actively talking about that and would like to see, dozens of crossing projects come about in Oregon.
That's a tall order, though. That's a lot of money to get all those done. Do you think there's the political will there in this state to keep going in terms of paying for more of these?
I think so. It's a partnership between the federal government and the state government. And with that, Oregon's environment, the rural nature, the forestry, the wildlife element of the importance within the state of Oregon is we see a lot of value in helping to preserve that wildlife and put them in a situation to thrive, as well as keep people safe.
Okay. Something you mentioned earlier that the Oregon Department of Transportation has collaborated with a group called the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition on this project, and I kind of assume others. Tell us a little bit about that group. Who are they? What do they do? How did they get together?
They actually came together, I believe it was about 20 or 21, and it's a really diverse group. It was a bunch of scientists, biologists, naturalists in the area that their real focus that I think brought a lot of them together was the Siskiyou National Monument. And they have a broad, diverse background of expertise that they brought to their coalition. So I was a little amazed at the diversity of the membership. We have everybody from the folks that are focused on the wildlife to the Oregon Hunters Association. So to bring a group together with that, which obviously have different interests, is the Hunters Association has been fantastic, and they really want to see the preservation of all the species in there and wants to see an environment that would help them thrive as well. So there's been a lot of common ground for the group to come together and support the efforts. But they were the ones who initially started, they did their own fundraising, and they hired their own consultants to do some of the wildlife studies that were done. So they really formed up as a group and took a very professional, proactive approach to wanting to see a benefit to the monument. And they said, how best could we do that? So they partnered with the other groups, went after funding, worked with a variety of organizations to help fund their efforts. And they brought to us a very nice, detailed, data-driven package of information that said, we think this would be, very beneficial to the Siskiyous, to this area. And we would love to see you, they'd love to see us get a crossing in all 8 locations that they suggested. And we may get that done one day. But for now, it was quite interesting. As they brought that information to us, they had scored through a series of evaluations and metrics of their study. And with that, they came up with one location that was by far the most beneficial from the wildlife perspective. And as it would turn out, as we approached it from the construction side of that discussion, and what could we actually build and how effective could we be with this project, is fortunately we both landed at the same location as the top priority. So their wildlife score was the place we said was the most effective for us to build the crossing.
Okay. Dan, that's all I have. Is there anything else about this project or the overall concept of wildlife crossings that you'd like to get across to people, or maybe I didn't ask about that I should have?
I'd just like to emphasize that the benefit of these crossings is enormous, and the reduction in the crashes, the helping sustain the various species that are served by being able to have a crossing is a value. It's a much larger value than just the saving the property damage and those things that go along when you think of some of these collisions when wildlife gets hit. So it's far-reaching, the benefits of this that serve extended purposes. And just like everybody, it was eye-opening for me, and I'm certainly trying to share that with everybody. And seeing the success of the other crossings is, I think that's something that's really going to benefit our region substantially.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on, and look forward to talking to you throughout the course of the project, if you'd like.
That was Dan Roberts, a project manager with the Oregon Department of Transportation, talking about a wildlife crossing the state is constructing over Interstate 5. You can learn more about the project at the Oregon DOT's website, oregon.gov/ODOT. Again, that website is oregon.gov/ODOT. And we'll have a link to that website at our website, landlinenow.com. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and information. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.